In part one of the stolen election, we saw how stunningly successful companies like ABC, CNN, and all the others have been when it comes to the ability of these agencies to suppress the news. But every now and then, some actual journalism does manage to penetrate the blackout curtains and the painted over windows, and that's when the second echelon of the stolen election moves into position. On October 14th, 2020, that was just short of 3 weeks before the election, the New York Post broke a story that could have and would have changed the course of the 2020 presidential election. Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, had dropped off a computer laptop at a computer repair store due to water damage. Now, that hard drive revealed unimpeachable evidence of a massive and grotesquely simple corruption racket, namely that the huge salaries and cash payments Hunter Biden received were not made in exchange for Hunter Biden's astonishing business acumen. They were cash payments made to him in order to get the ear of his father, who was Vice President of the United States of America for much of the time and the presumptive Democratic Party frontrunner for the remainder of it. Now, this was damning stuff, particularly the emails where Hunter complained about the big guy taking half. The New York Times, CNN, ABC, The Washington Post, and all the rest were out there earning their pay, doing their best to suppress this critical piece of news, but never fear. In the unlikely event that actual news should escape the reinforced concrete containment structure, it will be instantly recognized and targeted by the artificial intelligence algorithms that will spot it whenever it pops up and instantly vaporize it. The New York Post tweeted the story. Twitter blocked the individual tweet and immediately froze the New York Post's account. They did it for 2 weeks. So, who determines what you see or don't see regarding the 2020 election? Well, this guy does. This is Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, the guy who thinks that you're not up to his level, emotionally or morally or intellectually, and therefore he's entitled to make your decisions for you for your own good, of course. So let's listen to Republican Senator Ted Cruz of Texas on October 28th, 2020. That's exactly 1 week before the election.
Why did Twitter make the decision to censor the New York Post?
We had a hack materials policy that we...
When was that policy adopted?
In 2018, I believe.
In 2018, go ahead. What was the policy?
So the policy is around limiting the spread of materials that are hacked. We didn't want Twitter to be a distributor for hack materials.
Did Twitter block the distribution of the New York Times' story a few weeks ago that purported to be based on copies of President Trump's tax returns?
We didn't find that a violation of our terms of service in this policy in particular, because it was reporting about the material. It wasn't distributing the material.
Okay, well, that's actually not true. They posted what they purported to be original source materials, and federal law, federal statute makes it a crime, a federal felony, to distribute someone's tax returns against their knowledge. So that material was based on something that was distributed in violation of federal law, and yet Twitter gleefully allowed people to circulate that. But when the article was critical of Joe Biden, Twitter engaged in rampant censorship and silencing.
And again, we recognized errors in that policy. We changed it within 24 hours.
Now, despite the protestations of Trevor bin Laden here, there is no question that Twitter's blocking of the Hunter Biden story was election interference. It was even election fraud, but they went further. If you tweeted out a direct link to the story that you got and copied and pasted, you sent that out to your friends and followers, Twitter blocked that message too. Imagine that you happen to stumble upon this critical, thoroughly documented story, and it bears mentioning, by the way, that the Biden campaign never denied either the authenticity of the hard drive or the emails and the photos contained on it. And let's say you read that article and shocked at the level of corruption, you call your friend to tell him what you heard. Hey, Bob. Hey, Jim. What's up? Dude, did you see that story on Hunter Biden's laptop? Beep. We're sorry. Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please hang up and try again later. Hey, what happened, man? You got cut off. I don't know. Anyway, there's this story in the New York Post about Hunter. Beep. We're sorry. Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please hang up and try again later. That's what this utterly baked, stoned out of his mind Jack Dorsey did to private conversations between you and your friends and relatives in order to block this story. So, does that matter? Well, on November 13th, 10 days after the election, the Washington Examiner reported on a survey conducted by the Media Research Center in which they asked Biden voters, now these are not likely voters or registered voters, these are people who had actually voted for Joe Biden 10 days earlier in the 2020 election, and they asked them two ponderously worded but nevertheless pretty simple questions. One, did you hear about the Hunter Biden laptop story before the election? And two, if you had, would it have changed the way you voted? 36% of those people who had voted for Joe Biden replied that they had not been aware of the story, and 13% of that 36% said that they would not have voted for Joe Biden if they had known about it. Now, according to that survey, out of the total sample of people who actually voted for Joe Biden, that means 4.6% said they would not have voted for Joe Biden had they heard about the Hunter Biden laptop story. So let's take a look at the election map. Let's see here. What would happen if you took 4.6% of the vote away from Biden, not give a single one of them to Trump? They didn't say they'd vote for Trump. They just said they wouldn't vote for Biden. Now, as things stand as I record this, here are the final 2020 presidential election results listed by the constitutional authority granted the power to determine the winner of a presidential election, the Associated Press. The AP has an electoral score of 306 for Biden and 232 for Trump. Now, let's just pull 4.6% away from Biden, not give a single one of those votes to Trump for the battleground states. In Wisconsin went to Biden by a margin of 49.6 to Trump's 48.9. Take 4.6% away from Biden, Trump wins Wisconsin. Michigan, Biden is 50.6, Trump is 47.8. Subtracting that 4.6% from Biden puts him at 46% to Trump's 47.8, and Trump wins Michigan. Trump wins Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, and Pennsylvania as well. This is what the map looks like without that tweet being blocked. If the people who voted for Biden did what they said they would do, then the actual electoral account would have been Biden 227 and Trump 311. That's what would have happened if Twitter had not blocked the New York Post account for 2 weeks, severed the voters' ability to share the story among their friends, and needless to say, if any of the other major news suppression agencies like ABC, CBS, CNN, or the New York Times had given the story anything like a fair hearing. Now, in his defense, Malibu Rasputin here admitted that there had been an error and that changes have been implemented, which sounds to me something like this. Mr. Whittle, on November 3rd, 2020, you entered the Wells Fargo Bank, gunned down 26 people in cold blood, blew open the safe, absconded with $72 million, and then shot 3 paramedics in the head on the way out to your getaway car. What do you have to say in your defense? Well, Your Honor, I recognize that there was an error in that policy, and I've taken appropriate measures to make sure that it doesn't happen again. See ya. Look, I've been fighting conspiracy theories all my professional life, and to me, the most obviously ridiculous one was the idea that shape-shifting reptilians had taken over key positions and were slowly enslaving the human race. But I have to tell you, folks, after watching this guy testify, you're really starting to win me over. Moving from Twitter to Facebook, we find out that Facebook outright banned conservative political ads without touching progressive ones. An American Principles Project ad regarding Joe Biden's stated position regarding transgendered athletes contained not a single falsehood or exaggeration. Nevertheless, it was flagged with the following pack of neutron star density lies. It had an attachment that read, "A post shared by your page is missing context. Independent fact checkers at PolitiFact say that the information shared by the American Principles Project is missing context and could mislead people. We've added a note to your post." And they helpfully include a link. Now first, that ad is not missing context. An ad for a Dodge pickup truck isn't banned for not providing context by requiring that that same Dodge ad also make the case for buying a Ford. There's nothing independent about the fact checkers because PolitiFact, like Snopes, is a left-wing psychological warfare project designed to sow fear, uncertainty, and doubt among anyone not agreeing with their failed, miserable, blood-splattered commie ideas and who might therefore get in the way of their power grab. Now, APP challenged the censorship. What happened next? Well, here's Utah Republican Senator Mike Lee.
The very next day, the third-party fact checker issued a statement retracting the assessment and retracting it as erroneous. However, it stunningly took Facebook almost 2 more weeks until October 29th, when voting had already started in many jurisdictions, to lift the ban on these legitimate ads. Ads that the fact checker had already declared a couple weeks earlier were erroneously taken down. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, why on earth did it take Facebook 2 weeks to correct this error?
Senator, I'm not familiar with the details of us re-enabling that ad, so I can follow up with you after. It's possible that this was just a mistake or delay, and unfortunately, when we handle millions or billions of pieces of content a day, while we strive to do as well as possible and be as precise as possible, we will make some mistakes.
Thank you. I appreciate your acknowledgement of the fact that there are mistakes. As I've noted previously, those mistakes sure happen a whole lot more on one side of the political spectrum than the other.
Now, just as an aside, but one that really does bear on the issue, there is something deeply, profoundly unsettling about Mark Zuckerberg. For the longest time, I couldn't put my finger on what it was about him, and then suddenly I did.
Lifeless eyes, black eyes like a doll's eyes.
I would like to address the most common reply given by Mr. Zuckerberg.
So I can follow up with you after.
Well, that sounds helpful, doesn't it? He's going to work on it and then get back to us later. And when that happens, the only teensy-weensy little difference will be that when he gets back to us, he will not be under oath, meaning that he will not be in the slightest way legally responsible for whatever lies he wants to spin. Keep that in mind as he answers a series of questions from Republican Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri.
Will you provide a list of every website and hashtag that Facebook content moderation teams have discussed banning on the task platform?
Senator, again, I would be happy to follow up with you or your team to discuss further how we might move forward on that. But without
will you commit to it here? Senator Cruz and Senator Lee both asked you for lists of individuals, websites, entities that have been subject to content moderation. You expressed doubt about whether any such information exists, but you've also now said that the task website, you've acknowledged the task platform exists, that it is searchable. So will you commit to providing the information you have logged on the task website about content moderation that your company has undertaken? Yes or no?
Senator, I think it would be better to follow up once I've had a chance to discuss with my team what any sensitivity around that would be that might prevent the kind of sharing that you're talking about. But once I've done that, I would be happy to follow up.
All right. Mr. Zuckerberg, tell me about Centra. What is the Facebook internal tool called Centra?
Senator, I'm not aware of any tool with that name.
Do you have a tool that does exactly what I've described and that you can see here over my shoulder? Or are you saying that that doesn't exist?
Senator, I'm saying that I'm not familiar with it and that I'd be happy to follow up and get you and your team the information that you would like on this. But I'm limited in what I can, what I'm familiar with and can share today.
These two people have determined that they are mentally and morally equipped to tell you how to think, what to feel, and who to vote for. But in the end, Twitter and Facebook are small potatoes. Each one of them alone statistically stole the election, but the real enemy is much less visible and much, much more dangerous. By the way, this would be a good time to hit the subscribe button and be sure to click on the little Liberty bell next to it. I'll wait for a second or two while you do that. Several years ago, an internal presentation intended strictly for top Google executives was released by a whistleblower. It's called The Selfish Ledger, and it is the most cold-blooded, terrifying thing that I have ever encountered.
When we use contemporary technology, a trail of information is created in the form of data. When analyzed, it describes our actions, decisions, preferences, movement, and relationships. This codified version of who we are becomes ever more complex, developing, changing, and deforming based on our actions. In this regard, this ledger of our data may be considered a Lamarckian epigenome, a constantly evolving representation of who we are.
The high-level Google executives who created the Selfish Ledger did it because it parallels the ideas promoted in Richard Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene. Now, Dawkins argues that it's your genetic code that is permanent. You and I, our parents and children, are essentially just eating and fornicating machines that keep the protein coming in and going out so that the genetic code can survive and flourish for another generation. Google has applied this inhuman mindset not to genes but to bits of information. As far as Google is concerned, you're not an individual and you're not a person. You're not even really a human being. To them, you are a ledger. You are an archived collection of every mouse click you ever made, every web page you ever visited, every article you've ever read that, when collected into a ledger, describes your mind in the same way that your unique DNA describes your body.
What if the ledger could be given a volition or purpose, rather than simply acting as an historical reference? What if we focused on creating a richer ledger by introducing more sources of information? What if we thought of ourselves not as the owners of this information, but as custodians, transient carriers, or caretakers? As an organization, Google would be responsible for offering suitable targets for a user's ledger. Whilst the notion of a global good is problematic, topics would likely focus on health or environmental impact to reflect Google's values as an organization. Once the user selects a volition for their ledger, every interaction may be compared to a series of parallel options. If one of these options allows the ledger to move closer to its goal, it will be offered up to the user. Over time, by selecting these options, the user's behavior may be modified and the ledger moves closer to its target.
And what is that target that you're always being steered towards? Well, this was intended as an internal document, so they're not mincing words here.
To reflect Google's values as an organization.
My friends, Google is not doing all of this to get us to buy sweaters. They not only have a plan, they have a plan that's been in place for nearly 20 years now.
User data has the capability to survive beyond the limits of our biological selves, in much the same way as genetic code is released and propagated in nature. As new users enter an ecosystem, they begin to create their own trail of data. By comparing this emergent ledger with the mass of historical user data, it becomes possible to make increasingly accurate predictions about decisions and future behaviors.
It's an interesting sentence, isn't it? It becomes increasingly possible to make predictions about decisions and future behaviors. Based on our ledgers, our archived history of choices and action, they can predict things like, I don't know, just off the top of my head, very large predictions like how people would respond to widespread voter fraud or some kind of pandemic lockdown, let's say, or even very small ones like which officials would take a bribe and which ones wouldn't, those kind of predictions. And Google's not just interested in predicting behavior. I mean, that's somewhat useful, but that's not the goal. If you can bear 54 more seconds of that reptilian view of the future that Google has imagined and is presenting to its upper echelons, then you will have discovered the end result of what it is that they have in store for you. And by you, I don't mean you personally. Individual people with souls and a unique identity, with friends and family and your own free will. When Google says you, they are referring to your ledger, your individually meaningless but nevertheless immortal record of the choices that you have made online. This is not the future that is coming. This is the future that is here.
Our ability to interpret user data, combined with the exponential growth in sensor-enabled objects, will result in an increasingly detailed account of who we are as people. As these streams of information are brought together, the effect is multiplied. New patterns become apparent and new predictions become possible. As gene sequencing yields a comprehensive map of human biology, researchers are increasingly able to target parts of the sequence and modify them in order to achieve a desired result. As patterns begin to emerge in the behavioral sequences, they too may be targeted. The ledger could be given a focus, shifting it from a system which not only tracks our behavior, but offers direction towards a desired result.
As Google points out, genetic engineering is not about changing the entire DNA structure of an organism. It's about targeting the smallest number of genes needed to obtain the desired results. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me make the most ridiculous example that I can invent in order to clarify the kind of behavior modification process that Google is striving for. Let's say that the artificial intelligence algorithms that Google currently employs discovers a completely unsuspected pattern that's lost to human eyes among the trillions of individual mouse clicks in billions of ledgers. Intentionally going for the absurd now, let's imagine that these AI algorithms discover a correlation between zombie movies and lawnmower sales. Let's say that people are 22% more likely to buy a lawnmower within 24 hours of watching a zombie movie versus those people that don't. Why? It doesn't matter. It just is. That's what's there. Mimetic engineering says that if you want to increase lawnmower sales, you don't need to increase advertising for lawnmowers. You need to ensure that people's search results will return more links to zombie movies. If they want to lower lawnmower sales, then links to zombie-related entertainment will be kept from you. Now, will you ever discover this kind of hypothetical link? No, never. Now, take away the buy lawnmowers part and replace it with things like accept the Green New Deal or go all in on the so-called Great Reset. What specific patterns, what products, what articles will make you more likely to support these things? Now, I don't know. You don't know. But they know. And just so you never forget this as long as you live, again, what is that end desired result that they're looking for?
To reflect Google's values as an organization.
We've already seen how the petty and obvious censorship on the part of Twitter and Facebook can and did steal America's free choice in the 2020 election. But that's peanuts. The real goal is to eliminate all free will without you ever realizing it. The internet presents your mouse finger with a set of choices. He who controls those choices controls you. Now, if this message has opened your eyes, then you are one of the very few people that need to see it and have somehow managed to find it. Share it through email with everyone you know. And if this soulless, desaturated, unemotional, authoritarian, reptilian, and just plain evil plan is repugnant to you, then follow the link below to either become a member at BillWhittle.com or make a one-time donation so that we can open other people's eyes before we all fall victim to that soft-spoken, sexless, lifeless voice and that melancholy music telling you in reassuring tones that the euthanasia that you are about to experience is not going to hurt at all and it'll be over before you even know it.